our experience in World Wars I and II illustrate the need for having a silver reserve. The Department of the Interior shares in that concern. A special study made by the Bureau of Mines says that such defense uses for silver, added to conventional strategic uses, make any storage of silver a threat to national security, end quote. Now,
everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I got a returning guest today, and we're going to be talking a bit about the history of money and the powers that be and what they do to control money and silver, really, by suppressing it and stealing the wealth of people, confiscating it in stealth ways and to maintain power. And to do this, to explain this all to us is Charles Savoy. He's written The Silver Squelchers, an encyclopedia on silver, and the Pilgrim Society. Charles, thanks for coming on the line with me today.
Yes, Ken, I'm always happy to be here.
Charles, I want to clarify something, and I want to give you the opportunity to explain yourself, because you had said that the possibility of the government confiscating silver from us is there. And one of the things you said in a prior interview is that it could happen at $2 an ounce, obviously almost a tenth of what it is right now. And some of us took it literally, some of us said it was impossible. And, we had a discussion with Steve St. Angelo, who criticized your words on that. And I want you to be able to explain yourself. And to be fair, we had you back on. Let's hear what you have to say.
Okay, that was the March 18th interview, and I know it caused upheaval in the community because I didn't intend to have the $2 quote to be taken literally. It was supposed to be exaggeration. That's what they do to us if they thought that they could get away with it. And I didn't make it obvious enough that the $2 an ounce silver nationalization price was hyperbole based on cynicism of the D.C. government. Now, that was like a ridiculous hypothetical scenario. And my cynicism is based on knowledge of what the money power behind the government has done for generations. See, in 1942 to 47, there were rent controls that sent hundreds of thousands of smaller real estate operators into bankruptcy. They capped rent prices, and the deep money interests could hold out, and gradually they acquired the holdings that the smaller operators were broken out of. In 1873, Congress said you can't use silver to make any payment over $5 in one payment. That caused millions of people to lose their land, et cetera, et cetera. So, but getting back to this $2 per ounce silver thing, there are cases in actuality that are far more extreme. For instance, this April, a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal by the Langfords of Philadelphia for the return of 10 1933 gold eagle coins worth up to $76 million. Those coins didn't get $2 an ounce from the government. They got nothing, and they weren't silver. They were gold and highly numismatic rarities, too.
It happened. Yeah, it happened there.
Oh, I don't know if you've been following that case. It's been going on a number of years, but they took some coins into the U.S. Mint, I think in Philadelphia, for authentication, and the Mint grabbed them.
Right.
So anyway, I didn't mean to digress into that particular instance, but, in addition to see, what the government would do in a nationalization is, let's say silver was $26.89 on the COMEX on a Friday, and then on a Sunday, Mr. Trump would get on the TV and say, hey, we've got an emergency, we're nationalizing gold and silver, we're freezing the prices, so we're not going to get hit at any $2 an ounce price. That was bitter exaggeration on my part. However, if they hit it like at, say, $26.89 as a figure I just tossed out, it would be almost as bad because, eventually the price is going to go into the hundreds of dollars per ounce as far as its eventual purchasing power correlated to today. And we have to worry about things besides a national taking of gold and silver by the federal government, civil asset forfeiture, when they take tangibles, be it a car, house, jewelry, bakery business, electronics, bullion, or whatever. Guess what? People don't get paid eminent domain price. They're not paid $2 per item. They're paid nothing. So we need to look out for false flag events of police seizing gold and silver. Then the media telling us, oh, it's money laundering for narcotics traffickers, Mexican cartels, or Homeland Security says, oh, it's connected to ISIS terrorism. You know, in 2014, Ken, the feds took $4.5 billion in civil asset forfeiture, which, if it had all been silver, would have represented 226 million ounces at 2014 prices. And they keep yammering about banking transactions, like they talk about structuring. In last December, the Free Thought Project reported that the European Commission has now proposed to tighten controls on cash and precious metals, going so far as to allow confiscations, non-compensated, of gold and assets of anyone even believed to be associated with terrorism. Then we have this Financial Action Task Force on money laundering, founded in '89, and they say gold provides an alternative means for criminals to store or move their assets as regulators implement stronger anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist measures. Well, I got that off a Google search and didn't click their URL, which I felt was risky. It could cause a scorpion to come out of the monitor. Now, the head of that group, Roger Wilkins, was with Citigroup 2006 to 2007. Then the Guardian newspaper out of England in November 24, 2014, had a very biased article. ISIS commits Islamic dinar coins in gold and silver, casting terrorist aspersions on owners of gold and silver. We must be like ISIS, too. Look out. They can turn into diamonds also. So, in all asset forfeiture, there's no presumption of innocence, nor any burden of proof on the part of the accuser, nor any compensation. It comes straight out of the witch hunts, and they're working with the anti-gold International Monetary Fund. And there's one little detail we should add on to that, and I'm going to shut up for a second. Be aware that your property rights become less secure when you reside in a city with higher per capita municipal debt.
Charles, you said a lot of stuff there, and I want to touch on that civil asset forfeiture a little bit, but I wanted to bring something up here, and I think it's in line with what you're saying, but continue with what you're talking about if it's not in those lines. But you mentioned the Coinage Act of 1873. And this was a time, obviously, our coins had silver in them, and the act said that coins shall be legal tenders at their nominal value. And this was something you had sent over to me, and it was buried in the writing there. But it's a stealth way to steal the wealth from the people and to gradually absorb it. And just, if you would, and in line with what you're saying, talk to us about how blatant this theft was and who was enriched by this act.
Well, Ken, I really want to stick with current events, but since you brought that up, and I brought it up to start with, it's only fair to address that a little bit. If people will go to Morgan's site, I don't know if it's at
we'll have the link.
Blog or, hello?
We'll have the link. Yeah.
Okay, if people go to Morgan's site, they can find a recent piece I did called Silver Mining Kingpin Oppose Silver Money. So what these gold mining barons did out of the 1800s, they produced a lot of silver, but they produced a lot of gold too. So it wasn't just overseas interests behind this. It was USA interests, and this guy, James Ben Ali Hagan, got the better of the Rothschilds on something like 5 out of 5 occasions. I mean, he put it to him, and he had his way with them, and he even got a $200,000 judgment against them at the end after making them pay the price that he wanted them to pay for some mining shares. Well, I've just said that to say this. Everything in the financial world does not trace to the Rothschilds. That's a kindergarten fairy tale. Okay, they're one of the big groups, but they're not the only group out there. But if people want to read about what happened in this time, they should go to Morgan's site and look that up. And it's like 287 pages, and that was just a prototype. I'm still working on the complete piece. But to get back to more modern times, I like to give people a few brief quotations about what happened in the 30s and what's happening now. Newsweek magazine, August 18, 1934, page 29. Using the right of eminent domain in confiscating silver, Treasury officials could legally set any price they desired. They set it at 50.01 cents per ounce. The Wall Street Journal, February 23, 1968, page 13, said, Internal Revenue Service officials have expressed that the Treasury could put special taxes on silver investments. Then there was the Nation magazine, May 2, 1934, page 494, raving about what they called the Silver Maniacs. So we can't expect any support out of the media, just the alternative media. Now, let me give you the background for why there's a risk for silver nationalization again. It's really quite obvious. A mining executive named Harry Magnuson of Golconda Mining said, this is from the Commercial and Financial Chronicle, November 5, 1964, page 1709, quote, this nation cannot afford to have its supplies of silver exhausted because of the strategic use of silver in rocketry, space, and defense industries. Spokesmen for the Idaho silver mining industry recommend that the government maintain at least a 500 million ounce strategic reserve of silver because they are concerned about the defense aspect of the metal. Our experience in World Wars I and II illustrate the need for having a silver reserve. The Department of the Interior shares in that concern. A special study made by the Bureau of Mines says that such defense uses for silver, added to conventional strategic uses, make any storage of silver a threat to national security, end quote. Now, Ken, as of 1970, we had 165 million silver ounces set aside for defense. And the fact that for the past 15 plus years, America hasn't had a national silver reserve for defense is the main basis the fiends would use for justifying a repeat silver nationalization. Now, I asked Rand Paul to intro a bill to have the Defense Department go into the market, sourcing silver to restore the stockpile, and he absolutely chickened out, knowing that such legislation might cost him his heartbeat. Since the former stockpile is gone, the Pilgrims Society plans for us to become the stockpile at low prices if they can pull it off. There are two ways to combat this, and we will get into both of them.
Well, I don't want to derail where you're going with this. I know you brought up the civil asset forfeiture and there would be no eminent domain price. And an interesting point you brought up is that Trump protects the ownership of gun rights. But what about metals? Do we know that? And, he tells the NRA he backs the Second Amendment, yet firearms are frequently taken in civil asset forfeiture, which Trump supports. And so, maybe with that and going down the line you were going to go with, what are your thoughts?
Well, Ken, back to minute number 23 and second number 40 of my March 18th session with you, I elucidated my idea for blocking a second metals nationalization in two parts. First, by blocking these conspirators in advance of a metals nationalization and making a public record of it, which I have done at the start page of silverstealers.net. Now, these globalists don't want a wealth transfer to those who oppose globalism. Okay, it's great that Trump told the NRA on April 28 he supports the Second Amendment. However, he supports police stealing through civil asset forfeiture. He said so. Now, firearms are always high on the list of civil asset forfeiture items grabbed by the police. He gave the NRA no assurance of such protection. He wears any convenient mask in addition to his surfboard-looking hairstyle and his comically long neckties. Now, let me see something here. I was thinking about, there was something about metal seized at, it's coming to me now. In October 2010, there was an item at the sovereiigninvestor.com reporting that the U.S. Immigration and Customs agents and Border Protection Police at the Houston Bush Intercontinental Airport seized almost $160,000 in gold and silver in 14 separate incidents from individual travelers, none of whom had been involved in criminal activity. Does that make any of you, my friends, want to store gold overseas just to be stylish? What happens to it on return to the USA? Does it get intercepted by the authorities before it gets into your hot hands? Store it yourself, friends. Anytime there's a concentration of metal, even in domestic vaults, that tempts government to suddenly move unannounced to grab it. The more it's dispersed, the harder it is for them to take it. It doesn't matter about if the vault operators have angel wings. That doesn't guarantee the government is going to. Now, we are facing difficult times. We're probably going to go into some big financial defaults, at least by year end. So this harkens back to something that I read from the Mining Congress Journal, February 1962, called Our Monetary Crisis in Gold. It's a short excerpt from page 115. They, meaning the government, want to achieve national economic goals by keeping interest rates below free market rates where savings equal borrowings. They thus created greater demand for borrowing, which is probably meant by paying more dollars or opening more accounts in the banking system. There you have it. We are heading into a controlled economy, one in which politicians control our money. They do not want Americans to be free to own gold, and we're not free unless we can own gold. If we are to remain free, we must regain the right to own and use monetary gold, and never again let politicians create money. That would quickly put an end to the spending policies, but that is probably not the way we're going to go. Nobody knows the future, but history indicates that they will create an emergency of one type or another and then go into controls. Now, Ken and dear listeners, I am not pulling for any silver gold nationalization to transpire. My secondary site is silverstealers.net. It is nosilvernationalization.org. And if you spend the time reading all 188 research pieces there, I don't mean skim over, but I mean read. You'd be in for months of multi-hour daily reading sessions and seeing several thousand documented remarks, as David Morgan admitted in an interview on January 24, 2015. The 5-part Britain Against Silver series was 324,000 words. Now, I agree with St. Israel that the government would pay a so-called market price for gold and silver, but as I've already said, they would structure it to transpire at a moment when they froze the COMEX before prices got real frothy and do us out of gains that we would realize post the nationalization. We'd probably be done out of at least 95% of the gains, like what happened in the Roosevelt era. So, our top goal now is metals investors should be to anticipate the worst and act in advance to block a second nationalization. So my objective is to warn about this in order to discourage these monetary monsters from playing that hideous card so that it won't happen, warning about this pilgrims society that hovers unseen above the government. And it would be the actual source of a second metals nationalization. So I am blaming them in advance on my start page at Silver Stealers. I know they're monitoring what I'm saying about them because they said so in a January 2012 session at their site, pilgrimsociety.org. You can find it at the Harry Brittain lecture by Sir Robert Worcester, a media tycoon who owns his own castle, and he was complaining about my research, and they haven't offered to sue me for anything, okay? So one of their primary objectives is to prevent capital formation outside of their organization. To do this, they use government power against the public, like they did with the Roosevelt-era real estate rent controls.
Charles, it's so incredibly fascinating. You know, the things, the stuff you come across and the research that you've done. And you're talking about the power, the concentration of power, and, you know, whether that's communism, socialism. I actually heard David Morgan kind of go down and use this line here. You know, when it comes to communism, socialism, fascism, and any of these isms, it only works when they control the wealth. They're actually able to control the wealth of the people, because in any of these situations, the free market doesn't support it. And, you know, yeah. How long can they continue to do this? What's the next step of confiscation or price suppression? Because that's the other aspect of things. They suppress the price of these metals to demonetize it, to take the silver and gold out of money. And if they can do this, it kind of kicks the can down the road for them. But as you say, and as we believe, I'm not sure how long they can do this until there's an implosion in the economic system, and the precious metals reflect this. So, you know, continue with what you're saying, because I know it's in line with the research you have.
Okay, Ken. Let me digress just briefly before I get over to that. Let's go back to Steve Sanangelo's interview that you did. First of all, I didn't say anything about the government going door to door, even though he mentioned it twice in connection with rebutting the $2 silver thing. Now, going door to door isn't in the March 18 interview. It's not in any of my essays. I wrote in Precious Metals Emergency that I released in May 2004, almost 13 years ago. You can find it there. I said at that time they were not going to go door to door. And they didn't go door to door in the FDR period. They relied on a campaign of fear mixed with bogus patriotism. Now, in an August 2016 interview at Carson Street with you, I said they aren't going door to door. So I didn't say that to begin with. Now, if there is a second nationalization, they use practical tactics, such as requiring all brick and mortar and web-based metals dealers to remit gold, silver, and platinum group metals they buy from the public direct to the federal treasury. They might station Homeland Security goons on site with metals dealers, ban cash payments, and collect ID info for income tax, and yes, take down license plate numbers. That already happens at gun shows. Now, on January 3, 2016 interview with Daniel Amaduri, I made that same point that they try to grab metals by forcing metals dealers to remit them to the treasury. So I never mentioned anything about going door to door. Now, these things having been said, okay, in May of 2005, I put out Hoarders of Silver, which was an official document from the Treasury Secretary dated January 31, 1934, almost a half year before the 1934 Silver Purchase Act. This is at Morgan's site. It's number 46 at nosilvernationalization.org. And in it, the government published lists of known holders of hard silver, exposing them to risk of robbery by burglary. Go to either site to view the document. And as one example, it stated that Rosenblum Finance Corporation in the Diamond Building in Pittsburgh owned 25,106 ounces of silver bullion. In an extreme case, D.C. can offer bounties to city police departments to seize silver under civil asset forfeiture, in which case you get nothing, not even $2 an ounce. I know that's an extreme hypothetical scenario, but we have to push back against tyranny before it arrives, because encroachments are attempted all the time, and we don't want to become a country that's overrun by Mongol horsemen. So, something I said before, I want to repeat again real briefly. In August of 2016, I moved my personal metals to an unknown site in New Mexico because that site repeals civil asset forfeiture. Now, the Silver Purchase Act of 1934, discussed by Steve, was H.R. 9745, and then Executive Order 6814 2 months later. Steve says it was to get silver into the USA monetary treasury reserves to make a 25% value ratio of silver to gold. Steve cited official sources, but can we believe the government as to why the silver gap? I presented an extensive piece, in fact, 312 pages on these issues at Silver Investor, which ran June through August 2009, called Metals Confiscation, Facts and Prospects. Source material included hundreds of scans from the Commercial and Financial Chronicle, considered the Bible of financial historians, and many other sources. Now, Steve, in his April 4 interview, says Silver Purchase Act was passed on August 9, 1934. No, actually passed in June 1934, which he did say elsewhere. And EO 6814, nationalizing silver, came out August 9. I was the first member of the community as of almost 8 years ago to post about the 113 million ounces coming in to Treasury from Americans as Silver Investor in Metals Confiscation, Facts and Prospects, number 96 at nosilvernationalization.org, and it's on page 2 of that document. Now, we also hear many naive sources repeat another phony excuse for the silver nationalization, that being that the Treasury needed bullion so that they could mint coins. Sounds innocent enough, right? Well, friends, do you want the government to be heavy-handed with eminent domain tactics at capped prices, or do you want a free market? We never needed any means for adding to the circulating silver coin stock of our money supply other than the old and time-honored suggestion to open the mints to the free and unlimited coinage of silver. People could bring bullion to a mint, get it converted to coin form, and the mints would collect a nominal senior's fee. This the money power will not tolerate, because then they can't manipulate silver nearly as well. They preferred people to hold silver certs backed, or more likely not backed, versus silver coin. Now, to repeat, I concur with St. Angelo. The government would pay a market price, but they would aim to have that happen off of a COMEX price frozen before the price really takes off. So I've sent messages to state legislators in Tennessee and Idaho who already responded to my previous message to them on the Texas State Bullion Depository, asking them to publicly declare against any federal nationalization of gold and silver before the fact, so as to further discourage any sickening move. It's called nipping something in the bud, or smashing a wasp nest down before it gets to be full blown. You can't get close to a rattlesnake without being bitten. It's best to use a weapon on it from a safe distance. Political inaction always assures disaster. Now, this thing has so many ramifications. I wish that we could really get into all of it. But the fact is about the Silver Purchase Act of 1934, you cannot take the government at face value for what their stated purpose was. It was definitely for so-called deviant reasons. It was to create the greatest stockpile of silver in entire world history, so that the London, New York banking cartels could have a giant supply of silver to use to keep the price under management for generations into the future. So here we go with Dick's weirdest recent Calutron expose, which I can't find any fault with it. It's something I wish I had written. I was kind of on the fringes of it back in November of 2004 when I put out War and Silver, and I mentioned about the immense silver bus bars in defense plants. But anyway, this silver has come from silver sucking insect out of China, and it wasn't about a monetary purpose. It was about to control silver far into the future. Now, So they did create history's biggest stockpile of silver. And what did they do to suppress the price right after that? Well, in World War II, the British ambassador to D.C., Lord Halifax, came over and got 88,073,878.21 silver ounces transferred to Great Britain for price suppression purposes via the Lend-Lease administration. That's from the Mining Congress Journal, February 1947, page 84. So this is the same guy who previously, as British Viceroy over India, what did he do with silver? He dumped 640 million silver ounces onto the world market from 1927 to October 1931, causing the Great Depression by smashing silver's buying power. Then he turned up as president of the Pilgrim Society London, 1950 to 1958. Oh, somebody wants to know, where did that 640 million ounce reference come from? Well, it's in the New York Times, October 9, 1931, page 16, and I think it was from a former ambassador to Germany. So, the Silver Purchase Act drew so much silver out of China that officially as of November 3, 1935, China was driven off of its centuries-old silver standard. The Chinese finance minister was named H.H. Kung, like Kung Fu. He banned private ownership of silver, but of course, only the easily intimidated handed it over. Now, without the Silver Purchase Act of 1934 and EO 6814, we might not see silver to this moment under a savage price capping regime. It didn't have anything to do with achieving a set silver to gold monetary ratio in the Treasury. That was BS for public consumption, and the community should easily recognize this. Now, in one reporting instance, based on the 1934 Silver Purchase Act, 565,855,000 ounces of silver was foretaxed out of China into U.S. Treasury Department vaults. Commercial and Financial Chronicle, March 23, 1940, page 1859. Now, let me say one other thing that I got to give you a chance to get in. The New York Times, August 22, 1934, page 22, barely 3 weeks after EO 6814, reported that as of that time, about 180 million ounces of silver had been shipped to the USA from Shanghai barely 2 months after the Purchase Act was passed by Congress and signed by Roosevelt. Now, these USA moves also caused the opening of the Montreal Silver Exchange up north in Canada, having 150 seats. Mexico was shipping silver here from the eastern port of Veracruz. Ken?
Yes, sir. No, I wasn't sure if you were done right there. I didn't want to jump in. Charles, yeah, that's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And then the power, the money power, the concentration of the money power, they're on this constant attack to, steal in a stealth way the people's money. And again, I don't want to derail you from what you're talking about, but I had, noted in an article you actually had sent me that we could be taxed as high as 43.4% on hard bullion. This was a mainstream article. Market Watch put this out, and really, if gold is treated as money and people are transacting with it, potentially, I mean, how are people supposed to track gains and losses on a real-time basis? That's not what you do with money when you're bartering with it with people on the street, which many people think, as I do, we can get to a point like that, especially if the powers that be lose control of the financial system. So, just any thoughts on this, and just please continue.
Well, Ken, these attacks on silver, London, England is the home base of world silver price suppression. And I think, was it you or was it SCT I did an interview with, and I mentioned about, I think it was maybe you, Sir Francis Drake in 1572 stealing silver on the high seas from the Spanish. Well, the British did that because Spain was a competing empire and Britain wanted to run the world. Well, so going 399 years in the future after Sir Francis Drake, looking at a leaked list of the Pilgrims of Great Britain, 1969, I find Sir Eric Drake, a member of this same Drake family, at the helm of the world's fifth biggest industrial, British Petroleum. So, the Pilgrims Society has a branch in London and a branch in New York. It's an Anglo-American, a British-American thing, and people say, well, what about the mainland of Europe? Well, the European mainland is highly represented through long ancestral marriages, and the powers that be in mainland Europe long ago transferred the bulk of their power over to England, and the reason they did that was geo-military basis. England was the only European country that you'd have to cross the sea to invade. It's moated by the ocean like a castle protected by a moat. And there's no other country in Europe that had that kind of protection. So we can't get into all these ancestral marriages. That would be a hopeless mishmash. But it's happened. And but what I wanted to get to was the Pilgrims of Great Britain and the Pilgrims of the United States. They ping-ponged silver with devastating effect from the report of the Royal Commission on Indian Currency and Finance put out for the British Viceroy of India. In 1926, the Royal Commission said, we need to demonetize silver, blah, blah, blah. So they started dumping silver. By February 1931, the British had slashed away at the marrow and the bones of silver so that the marrow was on display at 24.5 cents the ounce. At the time, we had export industries for the Far East. Yes, we did at the time. So that threw these millions of workers out of a job because the buying power of India and China was destroyed by these British conspirators. So then the Pilgrim Society branch in New York got the torch passed to them from the London branch, and they're ping-ponging silver to the New York branch. And so they reversed the price, and they doubled the price, well, a little bit more than double. People were paid 50.01 cents per hard ounce for silver turned in, which was a capped price, of course. Soon after that, the world price improved by 40%. People that submitted their 113 million and 31,000 ounces of silver from August 1934, inclusive to February 1937, they were done out of additional gains. So all this silver that was sucked into this Treasury Department whirlpool gave them the physical component needed to hold back silver prices for 4 generations, and God help us, it hasn't quite stopped. And they invent all kinds of things to keep silver down, like silver ETFs, and buy non-allocated silver and trust us to store it for you, like the Morgan Stanley fiasco a few years ago. You can't believe the government's story about anything that they say. Now, we mentioned Steve St. Angelo, we mentioned Big Swear. Things about both of them that I like, and of course St. Angelo has made his niche about precious metals and energy. I have paid my dues by doing the labors of Hercules to be the historian for the community, and guess what? I haven't made a penny for doing it from anybody. Okay, not a penny. So, but getting back to Bix, another thing he has is about the Grand Canyon Gold. Well, I'm going to go with St. Angelo on that one, because if that were true, we'd have never seen the end of the old $35 per ounce gold price. and the collapse of the London gold pool 49 years back would have never taken place. As the head of the Fed at that time said, they would defend the $35 per ounce gold price, quote, down to the last ingot, end quote. That was Pilgrim's member William Chesney Martin Jr., who was not a Jew and not a Jesuit. He was a Presbyterian. So I don't want to send a discordant note, but the listeners have to think about things in connection with private vault storage, and I've said this before earlier, but once again I feel I need to reiterate it, is that concentrations of precious metals tempt sudden government seizure. Vault operators' relatives could be kidnapped as leverage to get at your gold. It's possible a vault operator could go bad, suddenly lose their halo, sprout horns, and a pitchfork tail. 4, it's perspective that state governments could suddenly slap taxes on your metal stored with vault operators. And 5, how will you get delivery of all your metal in a sudden crisis situation? For instance, if interstate highways are closed down in border interdictions. Now, having insurance coverage on your metals in private vaults will not cover anything past the value they had when at the time you deposited them. Future price gains aren't covered. So I'm almost done here with a couple of things I want to point out. We recently had a Texas state senator named Bob Hall introduce a bill, Texas State Senate S-2097, in March, blocking the Texas state government from seizing, confiscating, or civil asset forfeiting gold and silver from Texas residents. I must assume this also bans county and asinine municipal governments also slapping their thieving low-life hands away from people's cookie jars, which they worked decades to have. His bill also includes a number of provisions to establish precious metals as legal tender in Texas. It declares specifically that certain gold and silver coins are legal tender, prohibits tax, charge, assessment, fee, penalty, value-added tax, or exchange of Federal Reserve notes, dollars for gold or silver. The bill authorizes the payment of taxes and fees in PM in certain cases, and it does prohibit state authorities seizing gold or silver except on conviction of a felony. Now, the bill also has provisions, thank God, relating to gold and silver clauses in contracts, prohibiting payment in dollars if the contract calls for payment in gold and silver. Now, legally enforcing these contracts through state law would serve to encourage precious metals use. Now, it was either this same Bob Hall or another state lawmaker, Don Huffines, I think he's in the car business, by the way, who was the state Senator Trump mentioned in February this year to Texas police about destroying his career. Now, Trump acts like a friend of the NRA, but is he really? How many people accused falsely under civil asset forfeiture have had firearms taken from them? Now, I find a lot of info on this firearm issue on Google. In March, Texas House Bill 3169 was infoed, exempting metals in the Texas Bullion Depository from property tax. A great measure, and at least 4 other great corrective measures are still needed before I would recommend anybody to place their metals in the Texas Bullion Depository. Now, as I've said before, Ken, in general terms, mandatory vaccines are a much more serious threat to Americans than metals nationalization.
Yeah, that's a major issue, especially for me as a young parent with young kids. It's such a hard pill to swallow, and man, the society has not come around to understanding that, and you're looked upon as someone who hurts your kids, and is seen as somebody who is just so out of the box and really a threat to other kids if your kids isn't up to speed. And here in California, they passed SB 277, 35 vaccines with the ability to raise that up to 50, 55 without any legislation behind that. And if you want to put your kids in school, that's the way it is. And even private school now, and that's not even talking about, the only option is for people is to homeschool, but who knows how long that'll be available for until they really crack down on that. So I totally see where you're going with that, and I totally agree with you. Any thoughts?
Yeah, on the vaccine thing, just briefly, I know we're digressing from metals, but this is very useful. Ken, for people that are in a coercive situation and they feel they don't have any practical way to sidestep their children being barraged and bombarded with these very risky and questionable substances, vaccines, consider doing this. And before you do it, copy down what I'm saying and investigate all these things on a Google search. Do your own due diligence. Don't just believe my word for it. So 20 minutes to a half hour before you take your kid to be vaccinated, administer the following substances to them, possibly in a something like cream of chicken soup, or with that, something like that. Reduced L-glutathione. It helps the body filter out toxins and poisons of all types. Calcium D-glucarate, which is very excellent for binding to pharmaceuticals of every description and helping the body. It escorts these things out of the body. Give them some milk thistle, which is highly protective of the liver, and also some selenium to neutralize mercury. And I also add some green chlorella to absorb the mercury once it's liberated by the selenium. And then when you get them home, do the same thing again. And then, in addition to that, the vaccine sites where the needles went in, you might consider taking a ceramic saucer and put some coconut oil onto that and get it at a temperature to where it'll melt. I didn't say hot coconut oil, but just it'll melt like at, 82 degrees or something like that. Coconut oil is a very good carrier oil if people are concerned about DMSO, dimethyl sulfoxide, as a carrier into transdermal carrier into tissue. But you can use coconut oil, and again, mix some of this reduced L-glutathione. It's a sulfur-related molecule, helps the body detox. Oh, I would also say to this anti-witch's brew, add a bunch of garlic oil capsules, because garlic oil is very good with a sulfur content. It's got another item called allicin in it, which is good for detox. And detox is what you need, these vaccines. And what I'm telling you has the potential to pretty much, I can't guarantee that it's going to prevent vaccine damage, but if used properly, it has a high potential to frustrate the harm that can come from these vaccines. And as I say, people, look up all of these things and spend some time reading about them. I give all this to my dog when I have to take my dog for the state-coerced rabies vaccine. I do not tell the veterinarian, because then they look at me like, oh, well, you need to go to a psychiatrist. You're going to question us?
You know what, Charles, I'd like to get back to one thing here, and it's just talking about the money power. And just one last thing before we start to close up this interview here. But you talked about the power shifting from the European to Great Britain. And one of the things you pointed out was that the British royal family is potentially the wealthiest family in the world. And in a prior interview, you had talked about, and you talked about how when you look at the Forbes richest list, you got Gates, Buffett, Carlos Slim, as the top. That's what we all know as the richest people on earth, but we don't know about the British royal family. This is unknown to us, and you're saying that this is potentially the wealthiest family in the world. So just let's get your final thoughts here on this power control and how long they can continue to keep this going before something happens.
Well, Ken, we have the Forbes 400, which that started with Time Incorporated. The Time Incorporated fortune traces to a family known as LUCE, the Luce family. And they've been in the Pilgrim Society in New York for a long time. And one of them, Henry Luce III, I believe, was a Pilgrim's official in recent years. And then the Forbes list, Steve Forbes is a second-generation member. I have something at the start page of silversteelers.net about Steve Forbes, his bogus gold standard concept. If people read that, they'll see that, hey, Steve Forbes is not your friend. And, along the lines of politicians saying, hey, we want to go back to a gold standard, don't be in too cheery of a mood about that, because a number of things. First of all, maybe it's their idea to go back to a gold standard that as the first step in doing that, you've got to give up your gold to the Treasury Department. And then the second thing is, where is silver in this scenario? Okay, so, but you're asking about the British Royals. Well, the British Royals are the sponsors of this Pilgrims Society network, and it's all wealth on both sides of the Atlantic. The major dynasties that people have heard about have all been involved: Rockefeller, Rothschild, Warburg, the Mellons, the DuPonts, called the Merchants of Death from the gunpowder trade, chemical industry, many other groups. So if they saw the movie Braveheart with Mel Gibson, it shows the King of England, and that actual king in the early 1300s, a lot of these people traced to him, by the way. Longshanks. The king formed an influence network with the nobles, which is to say the wealthy people, and that's what they've done with this Pilgrims Society thing. And this thing keeps the lowest possible profile that anybody can imagine. It's just boggling how something of such profound influence can be so low profile and so unknown. It's almost like, well, there's a 100,000-foot mountain peak in Australia and nobody's seen it, but it's there. But, the British Royals have this group called the Pilgrims Society, and I've seen a lot of people might call it anecdotal evidence, but that they're the ones who decide who's going to get invited to be a member. They're the ones who decide who's going to be ousted. A member of the Speyer family was ousted just post World War I by the King of England, and I said that in a previous interview. And but one of the recent members from 2002 roster that I got at considerable expense is Edmund C. Lynch Jr. from the 1995 list, son of a founder of Merrill Lynch, and married into the wealthy Firestone family, who also became members as of 1970. And in addition to billions of tires sold worldwide, they had the investment bank Drexel Firestone back in the 70s, which raised money for Silver Users Association members. And, they had another guy named Schuyler Chapin from the 1990 list, and Wiki didn't mention his Vanderbilt ancestry, but it's there. Now, in the 1850s, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Schuyler Colfax, was largely responsible for over 900,000 square miles of western land being federally owned today. They made statehood conditional on the federal government having most of the state land transferred to federal ownership. So it wasn't a good deal, but they pulled it off. So between the Schuyler's, the Livingstons, the Sewards of the Alaska Purchase, and Schuyler Hamilton of the Aztec Club of 1847, the Mexican-American War, ancestors of Pilgrims Society members account for around 2.4 million square miles of additional land acquisition in the present USA territory. So we can just go, I'm prepared to go on all night, but we can't do that. But people need to be aware of this Pilgrims Network, and the top mega bankers or members, if you look them up in the Who's Who in America, in very, very rare cases will they say, oh yeah, Pilgrims New York, the Pilgrims New York, Pilgrims of United States. In very few instances of that, just occasionally they'll do it, and a casual reader wouldn't think anything of it. Oh, just another Manhattan social club.
You're absolutely right, Charles. You know what? You are certainly not a casual reader. You're not a casual learner, and you're a godfather here in the history of silver. And I appreciate what you do. And again, you're not doing it for the money, obviously, and it's a very noble cause. And and I'm glad we were able to discuss the clarification on something that became sort of an issue here in the last month. Regarding some of the confiscation at $2. Obviously, that's not what you meant. That's not what you meant literally, but it can happen, and it will be for literally nothing in comparison to what the true value of this real money is. So if people want to learn more about what you're doing and get involved with what you're talking about, let them know where they can go and what they can find.
Well, Ken, I have two sites, silverstealers.net. It's a chronological history of members of this Pilgrims Society from both branches acting to suppress. First of all, they had to get rid of silver as money. Then they could go against gold, which is what they did, because they realized that to get to full fiat, they had to get rid of silver first, and that's exactly what they did. And then I have NoSilverNationalization.org, which, until somebody can prove different, is planet Earth's biggest single concentrated source of history on precious metals, especially silver, but a lot on gold. Now, of course, you can find more on it in the Library of Congress, but that's all dispersed information. I'm talking about concentrated information. So, I'd like to mention very fast, one other member from the 2002 list is Robert W. Johnson IV, great-grandson of the founder of Pharma and Vaccine Colossus. Johnson & Johnson bought the New York Jets football club for $635 million and sent by Trump to be ambassador to England. And Johnson's visible worth is said to be worth $6.3 billion.
Wow. All right, Charles. Well, thanks for the plethora of knowledge. I know we can keep this interview going on and on here. Thanks for coming on the line with me today, and I appreciate you updating our audience on this important topic.
Well, that was just bitter sarcasm on my part, and I should have been more explicit and clarify that, that's just what they would do if they could get away with it. Of course, we've already seen about those 10 1933 Gold Eagles. They did steal $75 million in gold for nothing.
All right, Charles. Thanks for coming on the line with me.
Okay.